Boldwood presents New Arrivals at Hedgehog Hollow, written by Jessica Redland and read by Emma Swan and James Dryden. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. The story so far. As bridesmaid at her best friend Hannah's wedding, district nurse Samantha hoped she'd soon be saying I do to boyfriend James, best man to the groom. James admitted that he wanted to get married too. Just not to Samantha. Devastated but desperate not to lose him, she hoped that all he needed was time and then he'd fall in love with her. James did fall in love, just not with Samantha. At her Gramps' 70th birthday party that summer, he met Samantha's cousin Chloe, and the attraction was obvious. Her beloved Gramps saw it too, and encouraged Samantha to let James go. Gramps passed away overnight, and she fulfilled her promise to him. A year later, Samantha was bridesmaid again, at Chloe and James's wedding. Her heart broke watching them say their vows. She hoped a fresh start on the Yorkshire Wolds in a new role as health and social care tutor at Redfield Tech would help her get over James and move on. On the way to the wedding reception, Samantha got lost and stopped at a farm, Hedgehog Hollow, in the hope of finding directions. What she actually found was octogenarian Thomas Mickleby, collapsed in the farmhouse. Arriving extremely late to the reception and covered in mud, things went from bad to worse when her vindictive great-aunt Agnes outed her for still being in love with James, right in front of Chloe. Chloe was livid and demanded Samantha leave. A family rift opened up. Samantha had always had a toxic relationship with her mum, but now Chloe had turned against her too. Her fresh start on the Wolds was tinged with sadness, as she was ostracised by those she loved, but new friends Rich and Dave opened up their home and gave her much-needed friendship and support. Her dad, Jonathan, was there for her as always, and despite a shaky start, she became good friends with Thomas, whose life she'd saved. Thomas's wife, Gwendolyn, had always been passionate about hedgehogs, and her dream had been to run a large-scale rescue operation. They'd bought Hedgehog Hollow for that purpose, but she died before they'd been able to get the centre up and running. Thomas then lived a lonely existence for the next 2 decades while the farm deteriorated around him. Samantha spent Christmas Day with Thomas, but he finally got his wish that afternoon to join his beloved Gwendolyn. In his will, Thomas left Hedgehog Hollow to Samantha on the proviso that she finish what he and Gwendolyn had started. It was an overwhelming prospect, but she was determined to do them proud. Rich, a builder, had also been left instructions and a large budget to develop a barn for the rescue centre and refurbish the farmhouse. While the building works were underway, Samantha learned about hedgehogs in her spare time. She hoped to engage the services of Alderson & Son Veterinary Practice to provide treatment at cost, an arrangement that Gwendolyn had originally established. Her meeting with vet Josh Alderson didn't go well. It transpired that Gwendolyn's arrangement had been with his father, Paul, who was no longer in Josh's life and never would be again. He had no intention of honouring anything connected to that man. At the 50th birthday party of Lauren, Samantha's boss and also Josh's auntie, Samantha started to see Josh in a new light when he opened up about why he'd cut his dad out of his life. Paul had been in a long-term secret relationship with veterinary practice receptionist Beth, who'd also been Josh's girlfriend. The affair only came to light when Beth fell pregnant with Paul's baby. Samantha shared her heartbreak over James and the family rift. That night, their relationship shifted from enemies into something pretty special. A heavily pregnant Chloe asked to see Samantha, then accused her of having an affair with James, who had started behaving out of character. While angry words were exchanged, Chloe went into labour. Samantha accompanied her to hospital, where a tentative truce was called after Samantha's swift actions saved baby Samuel's life. James wasn't having an affair with Samantha or anyone else. He'd been diagnosed with and treated for testicular cancer, but had not wanted to worry Chloe, who'd experienced a difficult pregnancy and needed to stay stress-free. Work continued to develop Hedgehog Hollow, but the Grimes boys had other ideas. Cousins Bryn and Cody Grimes were Gwendolyn's great-nephews. Despite Gwendolyn severing ties with her money-grabbing family years before her death, they decided the farm belonged to them. When threats, vandalism and legal action got them nowhere, they torched the barn. Samantha nearly lost her life trying to save their 5 hedgehog patients. When she came out of her coma, she and Josh admitted they loved each other. Samantha's newfound happiness was tinged with the sadness that, although the rift with Chloe was healing, there was no hope for her mum. Before the arson attack, Samantha had asked if they could find a way to move forward, and the truth came out that her mum never wanted her. Her failure to show at the hospital proved that. Hedgehog Hollow is now officially open for business. Chapter 1. Samantha. I can't believe I let you talk me into this. Josh attempted to plant his hands on his hips, but the bulk of his enormous hedgehog costume prevented it. The leggings and footwear combo are particularly sexy. I tried to hide my smirk, but failed abysmally. I promise you won't have to wear it all afternoon, just an hour or so. There was a knock on the lounge door, and my best friend Hannah poked her head round it. Just checking how you're... Oh my God, Josh, that's hilarious! I need pictures. She whipped her mobile out of her jeans pocket. Josh groaned. Veterinary surgeon morphs into giant muppet. What a come down. There was laughter in his tone, and I knew he didn't mind, really. After Hannah left, laughing at the photos, Josh turned to me and smiled. If at any point in the future you have even the tiniest doubt about how much I love you, picture me wearing this costume and know that I did it just for you. This, right here, he indicated the outfit, this is what true love looks like. I stood back, taking in the padded furry costume with curved spines down the back, the brown leggings and long-sleeve T-shirt clinging to his muscular legs and arms, the large paws on his feet and the matching paws for his hands. His face and a tuft of dark hair peeked out from the underside of the hedgehog's head, and my heart melted. Every day you amaze me, and every day I love you even more. I gently kissed him, laughing as the head from his costume dishevelled my hair. Ready to introduce Mickleby the Hedgehog to his public? He screwed his face into a mock-mortified expression. Ready as I'll ever be. I squinted in the bright sunshine. It was such a beautiful early May day with a cornflower blue sky and a few wispy clouds floating lazily on the gentlest of breezes. Pulling a bobble out of the pocket of my dress, I scraped my long dark hair back into a loose ponytail. Josh stumbled as we crossed the farmyard, and I felt a twinge of guilt that he was dressed like a giant football mascot while I was wearing something much more understated and weather-appropriate. He'd given me some hedgehog-themed dresses as a present yesterday, and I'd selected a blue short-sleeved one with a red and white hedgehog print for today. I'd combined it with the hedgehog wellies that my good friends Rich and Dave had given me as a housewarming gift when I moved out of their cottage and into the farmhouse a month ago. As we approached the large stone barn that housed Hedgehog Hollow Rescue Centre, there were several high-pitched squeals, and suddenly we were surrounded by children, stroking Mickleby's spines and trying to grasp hold of his paws. A stream of children followed us, as though Mickleby was the Pied Piper, as we made our way to the side of the barn. We'd created a meet-and-greet space there, using a woodland backdrop and some wooden red and white spotted toadstools borrowed from the Performing Arts Department at Redfield Tech, the local college where I'd worked as a health and social care tutor since September last year. The scene was perfect for parents wishing to take photos of their children with our new mascot in exchange for a small donation towards the running of our charity. Hannah and her husband Toby had volunteered for crowd control duties. Their 8-month-old daughter Amelia was fast asleep in her buggy under the shade of a gazebo. I took a quick peek and smiled at the outfit they'd chosen, a pink cardigan with a hedgehog on each side, worn over a pale blue pinafore dress with a giant hedgehog and butterfly on it. She looked so adorable lying there with her fists scrunched up against her cheeks and her lips intermittently smacking together. Peeling my eyes away from her, I stood back and watched Josh for a while. As a vet, he was understandably superb with animals, but this was the first time I'd seen him around children. He was such a natural, getting down on all fours so the smaller ones could stroke his spines and pretending to snuffle for food round the toadstools. All around me, the sound of laughter and chatter warmed my heart. We'd really done it. Hedgehog Hollow Rescue Centre was now fully operational, taking in poorly and injured hedgehogs and orphaned hoglets. When we'd officially opened yesterday, a low-key event for the press, local dignitaries and immediate family, we'd had 12 hogs, but another 2 arrived during the evening. I'd been half expecting someone to thrust one at me today at our family fun day, but so far there hadn't been any more patients. Set out in the pasture was a bounty castle, face painting, hedgehogs being a popular choice, and various stalls selling locally produced food, drink and crafts. Dad, Uncle Simon, Rich and Dave were in charge of the barbecue. Josh's mum Connie and her twin sister Lauren, who was my manager at the tech, were running a tombola and raffle, while Chloe and my Auntie Louise were supervising some children's crafts. "I'm off to do another talk," I told Hannah. "Look after my favourite hedgehog for me." I nodded towards Josh. "I'll make sure I keep him hydrated and maybe a pouch of cat food if he's hungry." "Yummy, as long as it isn't fish, because hedgehogs need meaty food, not fishy food." I grinned at her. Have I laboured that point too much? She shook her head. "I've learnt loads of new things, and I'll admit to being completely smitten with hedgehogs now, thanks to you." I waved goodbye and made my way to the barn. If Hannah had learned a lot, my learning curve had been of epic proportions. I'd always loved animals, a trait picked up from my dad, who, like Josh, was a vet, and from my Gramps, who'd adored wildlife. But I'd known very little about hedgehogs. Hours spent researching online, reading nature books, and poring over pamphlets from the British Hedgehog Preservation Society, plus 3 days helping at an animal rescue centre, had given me a speedy education, although nothing could beat being hands-on with my very own rescue hogs. Late that afternoon, I sat forward in my chair in the deserted barn, rested my elbows on the treatment table, and closed my eyes. I'd assured everyone I was fully recovered from my time in hospital and ready to face a busy weekend, but that had been a big fib. I was still exhausted and ideally needed much more recovery time than I'd allowed myself. If I'd admitted to Josh how drained I was, he'd have insisted on delaying the opening, and that was the last thing I wanted. The Grimes boys had already destroyed so much, and I couldn't let them destroy our opening plans too. That would be like letting them win. Although we hadn't officially opened for business when they torched the barn, we already had 5 hedgehogs. I saved 4 of them, but the barn roof collapsed on me when I returned for the 5th. Josh pulled me to safety, but I spent 9 days in a coma and was devastated to come round to the discovery that the barn was gone, and so was Quilly. 3 of the hedgehogs I'd saved from the fire had since been released, but Mr. Snuffles was still a patient. With a broken leg, he needed much longer to heal. Even though I tried not to have favourites, I'd always have a soft spot for him after what we'd been through together, and I was already dreading having to one day say goodbye to him. I reluctantly opened my eyes again and stood up. If I stayed there any longer, I was likely to fall asleep. Josh and I had no plans for tomorrow, so I'd have a much-needed chance to relax and recover then. Outside, I found Hannah pulling a rope across the photo scene, while Josh simultaneously gulped down a bottle of water and wiped his brow with the back of his hand, his paws abandoned on the ground beside him. "Oh, Josh, I didn't expect you still to be in costume," I croaked, reaching for a towel and gently mopping his sweaty face. "You must be melting." "I am. They never stopped coming. I've never been so in demand." "I can't thank you enough. I owe you big time." He winked at me. I can think of a few ways you could make it up to me. Hannah put her hands over her ears. Ah, stop it, not listening. Laughing, I prized her hands away. Sorry, it's gone well then? She nodded. I think we've raised quite a lot. I flipped open the cash box lid and whistled at the pile of notes and coins. That's way more than I expected. People have been very generous with their donations. It was lovely to see so much kindness. The locals have been amazing. I'm so lucky. While I was incapacitated, the outraged community had pulled together, salvaged the stones and rebuilt the barn even better and more fit for purpose than it had been before, with a proper second floor instead of the mezzanine we'd had installed in the original barn. Today's Family Fun Day was therefore a celebration of Hedgehog Hollow being open for business, but also a massive thank you to everyone who had so generously donated their time, resources or money. And you've been amazing too, I added, giving my friend a hug. Thank you so much for doing this. Absolute pleasure. Hannah squeezed me tightly. I'm so proud of you and everything you've achieved. You're such an inspiration. Tears pricked my eyes. Where's Toby and Amelia? I asked, keen to take the focus away from me. It was a happy day and I didn't want to spend any of it crying. She needed changing, so he's at the car sorting her out. You look done in, Josh said, pushing back his hedgehog head and rubbing the towel over his hair. And you're losing your voice. I rubbed my hand over my throat. I didn't think so many people would attend my talks. I've done more than double my estimate, but it's nothing some hot blackcurrant won't sort out. Are you ready to get out of Mickleby? Never been more ready. He picked up the abandoned pair of paws. There were way more visitors than we expected, Josh said as we slowly made our way across the farmyard, me carrying the heavy cash box in both hands and Josh holding a paw in each of his. I'm thinking it's been pretty successful. Definitely. I'm full of ideas for next year already. I knew you would be, and I bet they involve me dressing up as Mickleby again. I smiled at the mock resignation in his voice as I gave him a playful nudge. He's your alter ego now. There's no escaping. He laughed. I might regret saying this, but it's been good fun. Hot and sweaty, but definitely fun. We'd almost reached the farmhouse when a woman's voice shouted Josh's name. We both turned to face a very pretty pregnant woman with long, pale blonde hair scraped back into a high ponytail. She looked familiar, but I couldn't quite place her. Then my stomach plummeted. I'd only ever seen her in a photo at Josh's cottage, but it was definitely her. Beth, the woman who'd broken his heart. I glanced at Josh, cringing for him coming face to face with his ex-girlfriend while dressed as a giant hedgehog. How mortifying must that be? What was she doing here anyway? He'd made it clear that he wanted nothing to do with her, and understandably so after what she'd done. His eyes were narrowed, his jaw tight. With a low snort, he turned his back on her and shuffled towards the farmhouse as fast as his outsized feet would allow. I didn't want to strike up a conversation with her, but it felt rude to completely ignore her, so I shrugged my shoulders apologetically and muttered sorry before turning and following Josh. Please, Josh, Beth cried. I've got nothing to say to you, he shouted back to her before disappearing into the house. Josh! Sighing, I stopped and took a couple of steps back towards Beth. I was going to have to say something. I'm not sure that turning up here without warning was the best idea. I hoped I sounded like I was giving her an explanation rather than a lecture. She stroked her hands over her baby bump. I know, but he hasn't left me much choice. He's blocked my calls and emails. You're his girlfriend, right? Samantha, is it? I nodded, narrowing my eyes warily, unsure as to how she knew my name or where to find Josh. As though sensing my confusion, she added, I've got a friend who still works at Josh's practice. They weren't gossiping about you. I don't want to... It's okay, I reassured her. I'm glad Josh has found someone special, she said. He deserves it. He was an amazing boss and a lovely boyfriend. She broke off and shook her head, her pale cheeks colouring. I'm sure you already know that. I really do need to speak to him. Could you have a word with him, please? Her ice blue eyes fixed on mine pleadingly, and I felt a wave of compassion for her. She wasn't what I'd expected. Josh had never said much about their relationship. All I knew were the basic facts leading to them splitting up about 18 months ago. They'd been together for 2 years, and he'd been in love with her, but she'd been having a secret affair with his dad, Paul, for the whole of that time, and 5 years prior to that. It all came out when she fell pregnant with Paul's baby, a hell of a shock for Josh and his mum, resulting in Connie filing for divorce and Josh severing all ties with Paul and Beth. I'd therefore built Beth up in my mind to be a horrible person, as surely only someone really nasty could deceive him like she had. I'd imagined her to be self-assured and probably a bit arrogant, but the woman in front of me looked lost and vulnerable, which threw me. I'm sorry, but it's really nothing to do with me. Josh has made it clear that he doesn't want anything to do with you, his dad, or your family, and I have to respect that. I kept my voice as gentle as I could. Please, she begged again. It's really important I speak to him. Tears glistened in her eyes. I know how stubborn he is, and I know how much we hurt him, but surely you can... Her voice tailed off as I shook my head vigorously. I'm sorry, I can't. It's Josh's decision, and I'm not going to interfere. I absolutely didn't want to get involved. Relationships between families could be complicated, something I knew firsthand, and I didn't want to say or do anything that might suggest to Josh that I didn't understand how he felt, because I absolutely did. I couldn't help feeling sorry for the woman stood before me, but she'd made her choices, and she had to live with them. She nodded slowly. Okay, thanks anyway. I watched her trudge back across the farmyard, her shoulders slumped and her head low. She opened her car door and my stomach churned as she sat in the driver's seat with the door wide open. The minutes ticked by, and I worried she was psyching herself up to coming back and trying again. Please go, I muttered. He doesn't need this. Thankfully, she closed the door, reversed out of the space and set off down the track. I released a deep breath, then headed into the farmhouse, shaking my head. Just when things were going really well.
Chapter 2. Josh. I slammed the farmhouse door behind me and with an angry cry tossed the stupid damn hedgehog paws down the hallway. What the bloody hell was she doing here? And how did she even know where to find me? I stomped into the lounge. This was typical Beth. She always had to have things her own way, and every time she was told no, she simply pushed and pushed until she finally got what she wanted, whatever the cost to others. Not that I'd realised that at the time. She had me completely under her spell. I paced up and down in front of the fireplace, clenching and unclenching my fists. What would it be this time? Still trying to persuade me to let them move into Alderley, the house at the practice? My house. The one they'd driven me from after I discovered they'd been using it for their sordid little affair. Or would it be yet another request to forgive my father? Yeah, right. Never gonna happen. Or perhaps it was the other classic of trying to convince me to meet their baby. But he's your half-brother, she'd whined last time I accepted her call in a lapse of concentration. Half-brother? Biologically, perhaps, but not emotionally. How could they even think I'd be interested in playing happy families after what her pregnancy cost me, and more importantly, what it did to Mum? I'd blocked Beth's calls after that. Not interested. Ever. And now they had another kid on the way. I'd known she was expecting again. She'd thrown in that little gem during our last conversation. But it was still a shock to actually see her standing there with an obvious baby bump. I shuddered thinking about it. The pair of them could spawn an army for all I cared, and there was still no way I was going to step into the role of big brother. I shuffled towards the sofa and tried to sit, but the stupid bulky costume made it impossible. Grimacing as sweat trickled down my back, I attempted to hold the hedgehog over my head but managed to get it halfway up my body before trapping my arms inside the fabric. I couldn't see a thing and cursed loudly as my shins collided with the coffee table. I tried to shift the hedgehog again, but I was stuck fast and getting hotter by the second. Where was Sam? Beth had better not be spinning her a one-sided, lie-ridden sob story. The sound of the farmhouse door closing and Sam calling my name filled me with relief. "Help!" I called. Moments later, Sam's lilting laughter filled the lounge. "Oh my gosh, what happened?" I got stuck. "I can see that. Can you kneel down?" I fell forward onto my knees, wincing as they hit the solid wood floor. Sam was still laughing as she gathered the bottom of the costume and yanked it up over my arms, then pulled it from the top, finally freeing me. I gulped in several deep lungfuls of air. That was scary. I could hardly breathe in there. "You're safe now I've rescued you." Her eyes sparkled with mischief. "Bad Mickleby outfit." Then she started laughing again. Her mirth was infectious and I couldn't help smiling as I backed up against the sofa, wiping the sweat trickling down my face. I'm shattered. "I'm not surprised. It's heavier than I realised. Why don't you get showered and changed while I go back out and help finish things off?" Her voice was hoarse and kept cracking as she spoke. "I thought you wanted some hot black currant. You sound like you need it." "I do, but if I sit down in a comfy seat with a drink, there's no way I'll manage to get up again. It's not fair of me to leave all the packing away to everyone else. I'll make do with some water for now." "Do you need another pair of hands?" Sam smiled. "You've done more than your fair share today. There's loads of helpers. We'll be tripping over each other as it is." I nodded, relieved that I could be spared. Much as I didn't want to get into a conversation about Beth right now, I had to ask, "Has she gone?" "Yes." "You were quite a while outside. I hope she wasn't feeding you a sob story." I tried hard to keep my tone light and not sound like I was accusing her of doing anything wrong, but I knew what Beth was like. She was likely to take advantage of Sam's kind nature like she'd taken advantage of mine. Now that I knew what she was really like, I had no qualms about turning my back on her and walking away, but Sam didn't know her. She also had a hell of a lot more patience with people than I had. Give me animals instead any day of the week. "She wanted me to talk you round, but I said no, so she left. The only reason I was outside for so long was to make sure she actually drove off." My tense shoulders relaxed as I scrambled to my feet. "Hopefully she's got the message, but if she comes back, don't listen to her. She's a liar and she manipulates people. I don't know what she thinks she's playing at turning up here like that." I winced at the bitterness in my voice. Sam gave my arm a gentle squeeze. "You get that shower, and I'll see you later." She kissed my damp cheek, then headed into the kitchen to get a drink. The powerful jets of water in the shower a few minutes later did nothing to relax me. All I could hear was Beth's voice. All I could picture was her pleading expression. And that baby bump. Why couldn't she leave me alone? I'd blocked her calls and emails, but that clearly wasn't a strong enough message. She'd had to take it a step further and seek me out. She'd infiltrated Sam's special day, and even though Sam didn't seem fazed by it, I was fuming with Beth for doing that. What would it take to get her to back off and accept that I didn't want anything to do with any of them? Ever.
Chapter 3. Samantha. I closed the farmhouse door behind me, shaking my head. Thank goodness I hadn't agreed to help Beth. From Josh's reaction, pushing him to speak to her definitely wouldn't have gone down well. Not that I was surprised by that. I didn't think she'd have dared humiliate Josh or herself by turning up at the veterinary practice after he'd dismissed her from her role as receptionist there. But I hoped this wouldn't signal the start of regular visits to the farm now that she knew where to find him. In the farmyard, Hannah walked towards me holding Amelia. "Toby's packed everything up and put it in the barn." I gave her a grateful smile. "What a star! Thank you both so much for today. I really appreciate it." "It's been great fun. You'll have to let us know how much we've raised later. Oh, moments after you left, a pregnant woman appeared asking after Josh. Did she catch up with you?" I rolled my eyes ruefully. "Yes, she found us." "You don't look too pleased about that." "It was Beth, Josh's ex." "That was her." Hannah grimaced. "What did she want?" I'm not sure. She said she needs to speak to him urgently, but Josh wasn't interested. She wanted me to try to talk him round, but whether or not Josh reconnects with his dad has got to be his decision, when and if he's ready to make it. She looked surprised. I'm impressed. I thought you'd have done whatever you could to fix things. I sighed. Once upon a time I would have, but not everything can be fixed. Look at Mum and me. Toby appeared and I thanked him for his help while Hannah strapped Amelia into her car seat. Then I waved them goodbye. There weren't many people left now. Most of the cars in the farmyard belonged to friends and family. Ambling into the pasture, I spotted Dad and Uncle Simon, who told me I could find Auntie Louise and Chloe in the barn. I'd been surprised when Chloe volunteered to help today, because she wasn't one for helping anyone unless there was something in it for her. I wasn't sure whether Auntie Louise had coaxed her into it, or whether Chloe had made the decision herself as another step in trying to repair our damaged relationship. Either way, I was grateful for the assistance. Things were still tense between Chloe and me, but it was unrealistic to expect our friendship to return to normal after everything she'd done. I wasn't going to hold a grudge. That wasn't who I was. But I couldn't simply brush it aside either. She'd hurt me badly, and it would take some time and effort for us to rebuild our relationship. I still loved my cousin and wanted her in my life, but I couldn't help being cautious. Have you had fun? I asked them both as I stepped into the barn, very conscious that I'd been so busy doing talks that I'd barely had a chance to speak to them all day. Chloe smiled. You know me, anything crafty and I'm in heaven. For someone who was always immaculately dressed, usually in dresses and heels, and never left the house without full makeup and her hair perfectly styled, Chloe's love for glitter, glue and paint flummoxed me. Whenever I saw her dressed for her job as a preschool assistant in jeans, polo shirt, tabard and trainers, it threw me as it was so un-Chloe. I loved every minute, Auntie Louise said, and I'm so proud of this one. She put her arm round Chloe's shoulders. It was a lovely insight into what she's like at work. How has it been without Samuel? I asked Chloe. She was currently on maternity leave, having given birth to Samuel nearly 11 weeks ago, but she'd left him at home in Whitesborough Bay with James today. She scowled. Weird. I wanted to bring him with me. And I told her it would do her good to have a break, Auntie Louise said. It's hard work being with a new baby 24/7. Yeah, but James is Samuel's dad and perfectly capable of looking after his son. Auntie Louise squeezed Chloe's shoulder. And he knows that your Auntie Debs is round the corner if he needs help. I nearly snorted with laughter at that one. Mum being helpful in a baby crisis. I couldn't imagine it. Leaving Auntie Louise and Chloe in the barn, packing away the craft supplies, I helped Dad and Uncle Simon take the gazebos down. Are you pleased with how it went? Dad asked as we stuffed one of the gazebos into its bag. Very pleased. I think we might have raised quite a bit. Did you see the donations crates are full? Really? That's brilliant. I'd put out several large wheeled crates for donations of dog and cat food, disinfectant wipes, fleecy blankets and cleaning products. I genuinely hadn't expected them to get filled. I'll help you wheel them inside, then I'll head off home, Dad said. You don't want to stop for a drink or something to eat? He shook his head. I'm sure you and Josh could do with some peace and quiet after being invaded for 2 days. Besides, I'm going out for dinner with Lauren and Connie. Anywhere nice? We're going to try the Tortoise and Hare in Fimberley now that it's been refurbished. It was fabulous to see how settled Dad was, getting to know the area and building friendships. I'd worried about him making so many major life changes in such a short space of time, filing for divorce from Mum, selling the family home in Whitesborough Bay, starting work at Josh's practice and moving into Lauren's spare room. But I'd never seen him so happy or relaxed. The move to the Yorkshire Wolds had been exactly what we'd both needed. Sam, help! Yelled Chloe from the barn door, panic in her voice. Heart racing, I dropped the gazebo pole and sprinted over to the barn with Dad right behind me. What's wrong? There were a few people milling around, but I couldn't see anything amiss. From Chloe's shrill tone, I'd expected to find someone had keeled over with a heart attack. Patient! She pointed at a tall, silver-haired man, probably in his 70s, holding a cardboard box. Heart rate slowing as I realised it was a case of Chloe being overly dramatic as usual rather than a major crisis, I smiled at the man. "Hi, I'm Samantha."
"I'm Terry," he said, his voice low and gruff. "I've got a hedgehog for you."
"Do you want to bring the box over to the table so I can take a look?" Terry followed me to the treatment table and placed the box down. I pulled on a pair of gloves and peeled back the strips of newspaper inside it. "What have we got here then?" I said, lifting out the hog. "Oh dear, have we got ourselves tangled?" Thick black netting was wrapped around the hedgehog's spines and front legs. Chloe joined us. "Oh no, the poor little thing." Terry shook his head.
"Stupid community group fundraised for nets for the goalposts on the playing fields in our village. I told them nets are bad for wildlife, but would they listen to me? Told me I was making up problems. I'm out walking our Wilbur this afternoon when he starts bouncing up and down and barking by the goalposts. Then I find this little fella all tangled up in them, just like I warned them. I cut a chunk out the net and managed to get it off his face, but some of it's too knotted and I didn't want to hurt him."
I carefully unfurled the hog to see how deeply the net was wrapped and whether it had cut into the skin. "Our little friend is a girl." I lifted some of her spines to check for dehydration, but she seemed fine, suggesting she probably hadn't been caught in the net for too long. "You were right to bring her here. It looks like the netting has cut into her a bit, but it isn't wrapped round any vital organs or restricting her breathing. I won't know if there's any damage to her legs until I remove it."
"She'll live then?"
Terry asked, obvious relief in his voice. "She should be okay." I'd vowed never to give false hope to anyone bringing a hedgehog in if it was in a bad way, but I was confident that this one would make a full recovery. She was a good size, and an initial visual once-over suggested she didn't have any other health problems. "I'll cut it all off, clean her wounds and keep her here until she's fully healed. Would you like to leave your details so I can contact you when she's ready to be released, or would you prefer me to release her here at the farm?"
"I'll take her home when she's better."
"If you could get me a phone number or email address for the person in charge of the community group, I can let them know that nets like that do pose a huge risk to our wildlife, especially hedgehogs, and they need to lift them off the ground on evenings. I'll take photos of our little friend here so they can see the problem for themselves." For the first time, Terry smiled.
"You'd do that? That'd be right good."
"It's the least I can do. We're here to help sick and injured hedgehogs, but the best way to help them is to spread the word about how to prevent unnecessary injuries like this." I gently placed the hog back in the box so I could prepare the equipment needed to cut her free. "Chloe, would you mind getting Terry's details for me? It's that clipboard there." I smiled at Terry. "Thanks for bringing her in."
"How much do I owe you?"
"We're a charity, so there's no charge, but donations are always welcome." I wiped down the treatment table, placed a small fleecy blanket on it, added scissors and tweezers on a metal tray, then weighed the hog so that I could prepare the right quantity of painkiller and antibiotics.
"Can I watch?"
Terry asked. "If you like." Suddenly I was surrounded by a sea of curious faces. There'd been a few people in the barn already, but Chloe's cries had obviously brought others running. "I'll need everyone to step back to give me some space to work." I looked round the group. "And can I ask you to stay nice and quiet to avoid stressing the hedgehog any further?" I handed Chloe my mobile. "Will you be photographer? If you can get some close-ups of our patient and then some of the treatment, that would be great. And please forgive my croaky voice, everyone. Hopefully it will hold out." I cleared my throat. "I'm going to inject our hedgehog with painkillers and antibiotics before I cut the netting away. I've weighed her to see how much I need, so I'm going to prepare my syringes now." I was used to speaking to groups of people thanks to my teaching role. I was also used to undertaking medical procedures, having been a district nurse for 8 years before that. What I wasn't used to was combining the two. Another learning experience. "We need to give our hedgehog a name." I placed a smaller tray of syringes on the table. We've already gone through all the hedgehog-related names we can think of, so Josh and I picked a new theme, which is movie and or book characters. One of last night's patients was a male hog, and we named him Frodo from Lord of the Rings. So can anyone suggest a female character from that series for this little lady? My mind's gone blank. Arwen, came a few whispered responses. I smiled. Perfect. So are you ready to meet Arwen? An hour later, Arwen was patched up, fed, watered and nestled in a crate, which would be her home until she was fully healed. Outside, all the borrowed gazebos, tables and chairs had been packed away, and everyone had gone home. Perfect timing, Josh called from the kitchen when I opened the farmhouse door. Kettle's just boiled and there's a hot blackcurrant with your name on it in your favourite hedgehog mug. Oh, you star. I eased off my wellies and went into the kitchen to hug him. Feeling more human after a shower? Definitely. I'm no longer half hedgehog, half perspiration. Has everyone gone now? Yes, and we have a new patient. We took our drinks through to the lounge, and between grateful sips on soothing hot blackcurrant, I told Josh about Arwen. He smiled at me when I'd finished, his dark eyes twinkling in that way I loved. Check you out, educating your audience with a live case. I know, not quite what I was expecting, but I'm hoping everyone who watched will tell others, and they'll think twice about leaving netting out. Hopefully. And I have great news. I counted the money in the cash box while you were out. Nearly £400. Oh my gosh, that's amazing. With the tombola, raffle and barbecue, I think we might have passed £1,000, and the donations crates were full. I'm so proud of you. He took my hand in his and squeezed it. So many people were singing your praises today. You're a local hero. I don't know about that, but I do feel like what we're doing here is making a difference already. It definitely is. We've only officially been open for 2 days, but we've already had 20 patients and released 4 of them. And lost one, I said, thinking about poor Quilly. I knew I was never going to be able to save all the hedgehogs, but Quilly's death would always hurt that bit more with him being the first loss, and with it being so unnecessary. Fortunately, they'd caught and charged the Grimes boys. Sentencing would be imminent, and then it would all be over. Focus on how many you've saved, he said gently. I put my empty mug down, and Josh lifted his arm up so that I could change position and snuggle up to him. He gently kissed me, then pulled me closer and slowly ran his fingers up and down my arm as I relaxed against his chest. He always seemed to say the right things to comfort me, and I adored moments like this, where we could just be together, holding each other. He made me feel so loved, which was refreshing after my previous 2 relationships. I shuddered at the thought of them. Are you cold? Josh asked, wrapping his arms more tightly round me. No, just thinking about how lovely this is, and how it was never like this with James or Harry. I feel a bit stupid for putting up with such rubbish relationships. It's easy to see the bad stuff when you've moved on. Not so easy when you're in the midst of it. I wasn't sure if Josh would want to talk about Beth tonight, but what he'd just said was clearly referencing her, and it was too good a lead-in to ignore. Beth turning up earlier was a bit of a surprise. His body tensed. Yeah, and not a pleasant one. I adjusted my position so I could see his face. I don't know what part of not interested she doesn't understand. She had no right to come here. He sighed and added in a gentler tone. I'm sorry she put a dampener on your special day. Our special day? And she didn't put a dampener on it for me. I'm fine. It's you I'm worried about. I can tell she's upset you. Josh was quiet for a moment, then shook his head. I'm not upset. I'm angry. I hoped the pair of them were out of my life for good. If you're ready to talk about it, I'm listening.
Chapter 4. Josh. I looked down at Sam's earnest expression and sighed. Bloody Beth. I hadn't wanted to drag Sam into our mess. She'd been through too much crap already with her own dysfunctional family, and then the arson attack, so she didn't need the burden of my past adding to that. But there was no way Beth would give up. She'd be back and I wouldn't put it past her to try and catch Sam alone so she could manipulate her. She'd turn on the waterworks and plead her case. "I'm so sorry, I was so confused. I didn't realise anyone would get hurt." Yeah, right. She'd known exactly what she was doing, and I'd been the sucker who fell for her games. "Josh?" Sam gently squeezed my arm. I shrugged. I'm not sure what else there is to tell. I'd given her the basic facts, how Beth and I got together after her long-term relationship with a married man ended. Except it hadn't really ended. When she fell pregnant, I discovered her married man was actually my dad, and the baby was his. Classy. What else do you want to know? How are you feeling about it? Cutting a parent out of your life is huge. You know how hard I found it severing ties with Mum, but we always had a toxic relationship. You said you were close to your dad before. Close? My fists clenched and I could feel the anger welling inside me. I idolised that man. He was everything to me. He wasn't just my dad, he was my friend, my business partner, and my mentor. It was obvious from a young age how lucky I was to have a dad like mine. My best mate Lewis's dad had jumped ship before his brother Danny was born. He intermittently turned up over the years, demanding to see them, then letting them down. Their mum remarried twice. Stepdad number 1 belittled and yelled at them, and stepdad number 2 used them as his personal punch bags. My dad became the father figure they never had, and they were like my brothers. They'd join us for family walks, bike rides, camping and fishing trips. When Mum began working weekends, we continued boys-only outings. Dad always managed to strike what must be a tricky balance between being a father, including to 2 surrogate sons, and being a friend. Time with him was full of fun and laughter, but we were always clear on where the lines were and never took the mickey with our behaviour. I'd had such respect for him back then. Turns out he had none for me, or he wouldn't have done what he did. It was inevitable that I'd follow in Dad's and Grandad's footsteps and become a vet. I'd always loved animals, and when I turned 14, I started working on the practice reception every Saturday morning and helping out Dad or Grandad during school holidays. They were such inspiring role models in the way they embraced new thinking and ran an efficient, caring practice. I lapped up every bit of knowledge I could. Grandad couldn't wait for me to graduate as a vet and join them full-time. He loved the idea of 3 generations of qualified vets working together at the practice he'd set up, but it never happened. The morning after my final exam at university, Mum phoned to tell me that Grandma had died during the night. The heart attack was a hell of a shock to everyone, as she'd always been so fit and healthy. Together since they were 16 and devoted to each other, Grandad never got over the loss. The day after I graduated, we lost him in exactly the same way. Mum was convinced he'd died from a broken heart, and despite being a man of science, I was inclined to agree. Grandad's share of the practice passed to me, along with their home, Older Lee. It didn't feel right accepting such a generous bequest, especially as Grandad's share of the practice was the majority 60% stake. I wanted to swap with Dad, or at least make the partnership an equal split, but he wouldn't hear of it. He insisted that he could learn as much from me as I could from him. He encouraged me to ask questions and challenge the way things were done, and together we expanded the practice. There was never a need for me to play the "I'm the biggest shareholder" card, because our relationship was based on a true partnership. I shrugged as I looked at Sam. I trusted him, I respected him, and I loved them both. What did I get in return? They lied to me and nearly destroyed my entire world. "I'm so sorry. I still can't believe she was seeing you both. That's not right." "It's sick and it's twisted," I exhaled loudly. 18 months on and I still cannot get my head round any of it. My parents had a happy marriage, so why did he hook up with Beth in the first place? That makes no sense. Then when it ended, if it really did end, why did Beth make a play for me? Who goes out with the dad then moves on to the son? And what about him? He knew I was seeing Beth. Not at first, because we didn't want anyone at work to know, but he knew for well over a year, yet he was still carrying on with her. What sort of man does that? My voice had risen in volume and pitch. I shook my head. I'm sorry, I don't mean to sound so angry, but I can't help it. I'm still furious with them both, and I can't see that ever going away. Have they ever explained why they did it? Sam visibly winced. Not that I can think of any acceptable excuse for behaving like that. He tried to placate me the day it all came out, but I wasn't interested in his excuses. I was more worried about Mum. She needed to know. The affair was bad enough, but the baby news was horrendous. Mum and Dad both wanted a big family, but it never happened. She miscarried 5 times, 3 after having me and twice more after my sister Kaylee was stillborn. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Sam hugged me tightly. That must have been tough for you all. Dad never really talked about it, although I think that's why he was so devoted to Lewis and Danny, I said when she pulled away. Mum talked about it quite a lot and was always upbeat and optimistic. Obviously she was devastated, but she used to call me her miracle baby and said she was grateful I'd stayed when the others couldn't. I gave her a weak smile. I never really missed out on siblings thanks to Lewis and Danny being my honorary brothers. How did your mum take the news about your dad and Beth? Not good. My stomach churned and I shuddered as I pictured Mum that evening. They'd been together since they were 13 and they were happy. And then, just like that, it was all over, and she discovered that the past 7 years had been a lie. Something like that was never going to be easy to deal with. Not easy at all. I'd never forgive the pair of them for what happened next.
Chapter 5. Samantha. The hurt that Paul and Beth had caused Josh was obvious from every single word, every frown, every sigh. And no wonder. What they'd done was despicable. He had every right to still feel anger and confusion, especially as it had hurt Connie too, so he'd have needed to be there for his mum while reeling from the impact on himself. Thanks for telling me. I know it wasn't easy for you to talk about it. I don't want either of them back in my life. I can't do it. Do you think Beth will come back? She's bound to. It's the way she works, and she'll try to drag you into it all. I'm really sorry. Hey, don't apologise. It's not your fault. And I can hardly complain about your ex turning up when mine's part of the family. Josh smiled ruefully. I still think James is a tosser for how he treated you, but you'd be proud of me because I had a civil conversation with him at the press launch yesterday. I forgot to mention it. I raised my eyebrows, surprised. They'd only seen each other a few times, but hadn't gone beyond awkwardly exchanging pleasantries, so this was welcome news. Things were uncomfortable enough in my family without adding bad feelings between Josh and James into the mix. I am proud of you. Thank you. What did you talk about? Football, beer and women. I laughed as I lightly nudged him. And what did you really talk about? Safe stuff, the hedgehogs, the farm and Samuel. Any mention of the cancer? James had been diagnosed with testicular cancer while Chloe was pregnant, but the last I'd heard from her was that the removal of one testicle seemed to have caught it. He said he was tired, but I wasn't sure if that was because of the cancer or Samuel. Probably both. I need to have a proper catch-up with Chloe about it at some point. I'd ring James direct, but she'd probably accuse me of being after her husband again. An expression I couldn't read flickered across Josh's face. Surely not jealousy. Please tell me you wouldn't be worried about that. He shook his head vigorously. God, no. I trust you completely. Then what was that look? He grimaced. It was the mention of Chloe. I'm finding it hard to warm to her, and I don't think she likes me either. Ugh, I sound like a 5-year-old. I gave him a reassuring smile. It's okay. You're not the first to say that about her. She's guarded around people she doesn't know, which tends to come across as being distant and disinterested. She wasn't very distant or disinterested when she met James, he said, his eyes twinkling mischievously. Exactly the opposite. The fact that I could laugh about it showed how far I'd come. Even though James had broken my heart by choosing Chloe, and she'd then stamped on it when she cut me off after their wedding, I'd go through it all again if it meant I could have my current life with Josh, the farm, and the rescue centre. To find a rainbow, you've got to have some rain, and I'd certainly experienced one heck of a storm before I'd found mine.
Chapter 6. Josh. Mum used to joke that I could sleep standing up in the middle of a thunderstorm, and she was right. Any time, any place. The only time I'd ever struggled was after the incident. Until now. I plumped my pillows for what felt like the millionth time and sighed as I lay back down, staring into the darkness. Another thing you've messed up. Cheers for that, Beth. Her appearance this afternoon had stirred up a load of unwelcome memories about our 2 years together. Our lie of a relationship. So many regrets. So many moments when I could have, and should have, walked away. This coming August would mark 4 years since that fateful Friday morning when I found her crying in the staff room. It wasn't unusual to find a staff member in tears. We saved animals, but we had to euthanise too, and that could be tough on everyone. I assumed that was the case with Beth and said something to that effect, but she blushed and said it wasn't work-related and apologised that she'd been unprofessional by bringing her home life into work. She didn't volunteer any details, so I could have left it there and things might have been so different. But I had to do it. I had to try to be the caring, understanding boss and remind her that my door was open if she ever needed to talk, just like Grandad would have done. After the weekend, she turned up at my office and said she'd like to take me up on my offer. She claimed to be uncomfortable discussing it at work in case anyone overheard. Another moment where things could have been different if I'd had the sense to close the door and remind her that the walls were extra thick, but instead I found myself suggesting lunch at the Owl and Pussycat Tea Room in Redfield, one of my mum's favourite cafes. The tables were well spread out, so if she wanted privacy, she could have it. Even as she returned to the reception, I knew I'd made a mistake, but I didn't change the plan and I knew why. I liked her. A lot. Finding her in tears had cranked that attraction up a notch. I wanted to be the one to comfort her and tell her things would be all right. I wanted to be the one to make them all right. In the tea room, the waitress taking our order had barely stepped away from the table before Beth blurted out the reason for her distress. "It's a man. You probably already guessed that. He's a bit older than me and we've been together for 5 years. The problem is that he keeps lying to me." "About anything in particular?" She fixed her eyes on mine. "About leaving his wife. He's married." I was disappointed. Beth seemed so sweet and kind. I'd never had her pinned as the other woman. She mustn't have known he was married and was in too deep by the time she found out. Beth twiddled with the end of her plait. "I knew he was married when I met him." More disappointment. Why hadn't she walked away? "But I was only 17 at the time," she continued. "It was just meant to be a bit of harmless fun." Her eyes were big and sad and my disappointment faded. It hadn't been her fault. She'd been young and flattered by the attention of an older man. He'd no doubt fed her some bullshit about his wife not understanding him or the marriage being on the rocks. I knew the sort. Wanker. "You can't control who you fall in love with, can you?" she asked, her voice pleading with me to understand. I suppose not. I hadn't a clue. I'd never actually fallen in love, not even close. I wasn't going to admit to Beth that my longest-lasting relationship had been 4 months. "Anyway, he kept promising me he'd leave his wife for me, said they didn't get on anymore and the marriage had been over for a long time. So I waited and waited and waited some more. 5 years is a long time to keep stringing someone along, isn't it?" I wasn't sure how to respond to that. I wouldn't have waited 5 days, let alone 5 years. Although I wouldn't have gone out with someone married in the first place, even for a bit of harmless fun, as she called it, because it wasn't harmless, was it? Someone always got hurt. "I'd had enough, so I gave him an ultimatum. 1 week to end it with his wife or we were over for good. That took us to the end of last week and he..." Her voice broke and tears ran down her cheeks. He didn't leave his wife, I suggested gently, offering her a paper napkin. She nodded as she dabbed her eyes. He says he loves us both, but that doesn't make sense. How can you love two people at the same time? And how can he possibly still love her? They live separate lives. They barely speak to each other. I shrugged, aware that I was being no help whatsoever. I had no experience of the situation, no platitudes I could offer her. I think it's because of his son, she wailed. He has kids too. Another flicker of disappointment. Just the one, although he's adamant that the son isn't the reason he's never ended it. I suppose it's an added complication, I offered feebly. Probably think I'm a horrible person, she said, her voice full of defeat as her shoulders slumped. And you'd be right. I am a horrible person. I did a bad thing by getting involved with him, and this is my punishment. I deserve it. I should have walked away as soon as he told me he was married and not believed all the crap he fed me about it being over. The need to make it better for her took hold. It's not your fault. As you said, you were only 17 at the time, and you weren't the one who was married, so you weren't doing anything wrong. It's his fault. He should have known better, and he shouldn't have strung you along for 5 years if he had no intention of leaving his wife. She placed her hand over mine, and my pulse raced. You'd never treat anyone like that, would you? She gently stroked her thumb across the back of my hand, sending a zip of electricity up my arm. I'm not a convincing liar. It's much easier to stick to the truth. If I was seeing someone, then met someone else I liked, I'd take that as a signal that my current relationship wasn't working, and I'd end that first. She still didn't move her hand. And is your current relationship working? She asked, her voice low and seductive. I'm not in one. Her eyes widened. I'd have thought a hottie like you would have been snapped up ages ago. Had she really just called me a hottie?